Okay, so now that we've covered a little bit of the strategy there, we need to actually go through and implement these. So the strategy that we come up with will probably span more than one plan, right? I at least want to have one plan for each, each type of test and probably more for the different areas. So when I want to set up a plan, I'll come in here, I'll do new, and I've got to tell it a few pieces of information here. And I need to know the environment, right? So I need to know where I'm actually going to run these tests here. If you've not set these up yet, these are actually configured, the app here. Underneath the Tricentis test automation app, there is this configuration section here, and this is where all this information is stored. My default test environment, all those are just users, and they're just records underneath here. So those can be created ahead of time, or they can be created when you create the plan. The setup of these is really pretty simple here. We need to give it a name. So I will name these that, I guess I'll try to stay with what the customer would refer to them as. It will usually be dev test staging, unless they have more than one set of environments, in which case they might need to be more specific. But I'll call them what they call them, dev. I'll call dev or development, and that will be the name of it. The other thing that the environment needs is the URL. So it needs to know where it's going to actually go, whatever it is. So that the whole URL would go in there. That's what would be defined for this. Everything else you don't need. These were for some integration capabilities. Don't really use those. Description, you can put a description in there if you've got multiple or need some additional info there. That's what that can be used for. Same thing with the test user. So test user needs to know the username, the password, and then there's a display name too. And these I guess can be kind of confusing. The reason I broke these out is because this is like my ITIL fulfiller, right? That's the descriptive name of it, but the username is actually, an actual username in ServiceNow. And so I broke those out just so that there's some like kind of more permanent way to describe them, and then the actual username. Oh, one thing I should mention here is that these users are configured in the testing system. They have no impact on the target system at all. So by creating this here, the only thing I'm doing here is storing a reference to the user, and it's not even a reference. I always say that, but it's not a reference. It's storing an instance of the user and their password, which is encrypted here on this system, so that we can use it in the test. But it does not create, and it does not link or refer to the other environment at all. So what does that mean? It means if you clone over the other environment and you don't update that user or change the password or whatever, then this test is going to fail. Probably because this username is incorrect or doesn't exist. That's got to be like one of the top 10 reasons a test fails, is because the environment was cloned or a user was deleted or moved, or these credentials became invalid or stale. So there is no link between them, and it doesn't have any knowledge, nor how could it? But that doesn't, it's not how that works there. So you can define it and then just fill in that information there. The other thing it needs to know, what is the version of ServiceNow on this environment as it stands right now? It can be changed, so you can always execute or run this against different versions of ServiceNow. Certainly that environment can be upgraded, in which case we'll go ahead and update the version here. But what is the default version for this, or what is the version for this default environment? It needs to know that. So those are the pieces that it needs. Or I guess the other one that it needs is the name, and this will go back to our strategy. When I come up with the strategy, and this is why I think that like those two pieces are important: the name or the scope, and the type of test that will define the name of this plan. So I will say I usually start with the scope. The scope can be maybe a single table. So it could just be incident. It could be a functional area. So maybe incident's too small. Maybe we want to do all the ITSM apps. So we would, give it that prefix. There's going to be something here that identifies what is, what it is this is going to test here. The other part of it will be, the type of test. So unit or workflow test there. This combination is probably less common because, the workflow tests are going to contain multiple different flows in there. And so just to make it easier to find them, I would probably, if I was making a workflow test, I would label it by the application. But it's either way, it's okay to name these. You can mix and match afterwards. One thing that I'll mention is like anything that you do in here is completely reversible. So I mean, obviously you can rename it, but if you start and the scope is just all wrong, you can move those suites. It's just a reference field, so you can easily move those suites around and reorganize them. In fact, it's not even it's pretty common to see like people create their own development plans. So I would probably I'd call it like SAL development, where they work on a specific set of things and then move them to the final plan where it'll eventually live there. That's perfectly fine too. That reversibility or that undoability is pretty much everywhere in the system. I like to mention this because I like to make sure that people understand like that the overall workflow, that it is not, there is not much workflow in this application. It is pretty much just records here. So I could come along and I could delete almost anything, when I've done this too accidentally, but you can come over here and delete almost anything and be able to fix it, no problem. There's not a lot of deep knowledge in this plan. I can recreate this and reassign this, no problem. And that's pretty much true of everything. The only thing that is kind of irreversible is a case. If you delete a case, that's kind of undoable. I think you can undelete it in ServiceNow, but if for whatever reason you deleted it and then didn't come back to it for a month or whatever, those could almost be considered gone. There is some historical execution data of the case which you could kind of recreate from, but that's really it. Everything else here, you could almost delete everything and then be able to recreate it, no problem. So that's I'd like to mention that just because I hate going to something, especially like one of the ServiceNow apps, and it's just like, what can I change? What can I move? You don't really know. But with this, it's always very kind of shallow as far as the workflow goes. So that's it. That's the setup of the test plan, the very basic portions of it.